This is a braid of sweetgrass I was gifted, oh my gosh, back in 2017. I still have it. Wow. It's been my travel in sweetgrass. It comes with me when I travel. So it's not like a sweetgrass that I use all the time at home or anything like that. But it was really significant at the time when it was gifted to me because, you know, braiding sweetgrass, right? Braiding is really important to like practice and just like my points of grounding and understanding creation, basically.
You're listening to a conversation between Lori Clark and Megan Massou. This is part of a series of events by Pig Performative Inquiry Group and hosted by Neighborhood Danceworks. This conversation happened in April 2022 with support from Canada Council for the Arts and Arts NL.
Something I've been really trying to practice, when you're present, you're more open, and I guess speaking like from humans, because it's usually that there is more opportunity for a connection.
Totally, yeah.
For me, that's why braiding is really important, like, you know, talking about lands-based, talking about creation, talking about, you know, the ability, like the very intentional space of being in a present moment while at the same time having to work with what's behind in order to move forward. What I mean by that is when I'm braiding long strands, like 20 plus feet of material, tulle, awkward fabrics in the wind, in the bog, right? I have to be very present, but I also have to untangle. So I have to turn around and I have to really understand what's happening behind me in order to move forward with braiding.
Wow.
So there's this untangling, it's almost like messy, organic material that's really being activated by the environment, right? I have to have an awareness. I'm required to have an awareness and to be attuned to that, and a patience. And also a confidence that I'm going to trust that I can work this out without creating a big tangle and then quitting.
Right. Wow.
Right? So there's something in that that's very, for me, it is healing.
And as you talk about it, is there a particular place that the image of, or the placeness comes back of doing that braiding?
Could you see that?
Well, I'm really curious because there seems to be a land presence that is there as you speak, and I'm wondering how you notice that in your body.
Oh wow, yeah, there is right away. So down, like in the region that I'm from in El Mustugwek, which is, you know, the Bay of Islands region and the west coast of the island, call it like down the bay. Anyways, the Long Range Mountains are there, and I think it's called like Blow Me Down Park, but it's at the base of the Blow Me Down Mountains, and it's boggy. You walk in, but there's a swimming hole we walk in there to go to. You know, there's no cell phone service, so when we would go down there, it's like, even today, but like I spent my childhood down around there. Anyways, when I'm speaking specifically about that braid, that's where I'm placed. Because it's such a powerful area. It's not like super touristy, like it's not just like one of these things where it's like, go there and like do the thing. And, it's like, this is a really powerful area of the landscape. Like this land has a deep, deep, old knowing, right? So then you can place your body in that, and you can be in that space of like what I've spoken about of what braiding is, right? And for it to be in relation to that, whatever is being carried and held through that landscape, those frequencies align, right? Right? So there's like, my feet are in the bog, and the bog is growing these beautiful pitcher plants and moss and grass, and that water is soaking into my feet. You know, that is changing even the temperature of my body. Right? And the wind is hitting in different areas, and there's there's a fullness in that I don't think can be fully articulated through, this is my art project.
Yeah, yeah. Because it's so much more than cognitive and verbal and words.
Yes, no words, no all that stuff. It is a full embodiment. And in that space, I feel so alive.
Yeah, right. So the aliveness that you're talking about and that sense of the land being, I mean, we use this language that's clumsy, this English language, which is really not always easy to articulate liminality or embodiment. And I'm just wondering, as you're talking about that land, is there a place where you feel anything in your body, like tingling, or a place that's a center of that embodiment?
Yeah, it's really intense. It just shot through me like an image in my mind. Working with the limits of language, the sensation of my body when I think back to that was almost like stars in my stomach. And like if I think back and like try to imagine that and like close my eyes and I, erase everything else or any, I just like imagine a Milky Way in my stomach, shooting both up and down and around.
Wow. So it's like almost like being a constellation or in relation.
And being weightless. Like just being air, just moving dust. Time isn't.
Right.
And that's why, particularly that piece, that's why I named, because I did a short film from this, and it's called Becomes Body of Water, Interwoven with Territories Beyond the Sky. I got a thing for long titles. It's just the way it is. But what I'm bringing forward there as a poetic gesture to help shape some meaning is that the body is water and it became water again. And it is interlinked to territories beyond the sky, right? Yeah. So in that moment, you think of talking about ancestors, talking about stars, talking about these other worlds. In that way, what I'm trying to do is bring the viewer or the understanding that this is happening from the viewpoint up above, to imagine that viewpoint of looking down. Wow. And for that to go through into water and to move like water. When I think about that landscape and I think about braiding that in that period of time, just to the left of where I was working, there's this huge waterfall that comes down. Right? And that same waterfall feeds into the other area where we go swimming in the summer that's just like so rich in mineral. Right? And it's just like understanding that the body has opportunity to be recharged by the landscape, especially at particular seasons. So during this time that I was braiding, it was September, it was into the fall. It was, again, boggy, wet. You're not going to go swimming. But being in on the grass, marshy areas was more accessible. And so there's a different, there's something different that's happening in the body.
Yeah. Right.
Based on that season, based on the cycle of activity that happens in the landscape. So when creating and when like putting myself in those spaces of creation, I just feel more like I'm just here. This is the small gift that I have to give to transfer the energy or transfer the information that I've picked up and that I can, transmit. Then you have to talk about, but to put it into like a contemporary art context and it shifts and it changes. Yeah. And that to allow that space is fine. But I love being able to, speak about it in this context or speak with that work in this context.
Yeah, when you were talking, I had, like, at a certain point, like, this kind of vibration, the kind of, and I would say moving down and into my legs. It's a familiar sensation that I have, and I associate it with dropping in to being more present, but also like a resonant field where there's connection, and not just me. It's not in a vacuum. It's this connecting, and there being support and presence of well, I don't know, it's mysterious.
Yes.
But I love when that happens. Like, it's a feeling, a felt sense that I really like, and I trust.
Yes.
Yeah. You're listening to a conversation between Lori Clark and Megan Massou. This is part of a series of events by Pig, Performative Inquiry Group, and hosted by Neighborhood Danceworks. This conversation happened in April 2022. So you have a collaborator that you work with sometimes who is bringing some sound and her voice and song and drum. I wonder if you could say something about working with Janelle Duval and how that maybe changes your experience in your body.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my really empowering and significant collaborators that comes in on this braiding work is Janelle Duval. And Janelle is a very powerful voice, very powerful. And also because of like the spaces that we share together outside of the creation of any work, like just the relationship that we have and the understanding and like the trust that we have, you know, when we do get into these areas where it's like, okay, you know, let's create, let's make something. There's an energy there that you can't generate on your own, right? So this brings in, this is why collaboration, I really believe in the power of collaboration, especially when it can be done in a really solid and like trusting way. There's this opportunity for those levels of frequency to expand and to exchange and to shift. Like there are sometimes, you know, say if Janelle is singing and drumming, that I want to dance, right? But that's different because when I'm braiding, I'm not so much there to dance. So I have to activate the strands in my body in a different way, right? That's not necessarily going into like a drum style dance, but it's transmitting that sound, that language and that prayer through the body, through the braid, without it being quote unquote a dance.
Yeah, right. So when I see that work, it reads as dance to me as well. Like, so it's not a traditional dance, but I can kind of almost observe that your sense of rhythm and energy moving through from the ground through your body and then through the material, and also there's so much exchange of weight sometimes that's really really exciting to watch, because it's the relationship with the materials and the land and the ground, and being able to yield your weight to the ground through the materials
Yes.
is to me is dance.
Oh.
It seems like you really like those moments where there's weight.
I do.
Yeah.
And the tension, and there's an intensity. So if Janelle will get on a pickup, when Janelle picks up, it's like it's on.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
It's on. There's no fucking around here.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
like it's like that.
Yeah.
It's like that. And then I feel supported and opened up to be able to go into it, because that space is being held and brought forward through voice.
Yeah.
Right? And through the power of the voice.
Yeah, and the breath.
The breath.
Yeah.
Also coming back down into the stomach. You know. And so then specifically that piece with the red satin, that was really amazing, because Janelle and I did that with those exact same strands first out in Dontera, in Bonavista back in 2019.
Oh, okay.
That was the first time we like tried this collaboration together. I'd done, you know, the interrelation series, which brought in collaborators from other territories as I was visiting those territories. But Janelle and I did the piece in Dontera, and so when we did Dasik Amuchba Iganamulek, which is, you know, now a short film, but that performance happened in St. George's, using the same satins, but cut because those the braid that was wait, let me back up. Those strands get tied to rocks and buried into the ground. So like what I was speaking about that now even a little bit more. For me to be able to, you know, braid and express the body through moments of tension, intensity, peace, you know, that pickup, the many movements that are brought forward to be expressive, they're coming from a connection into the ground because those rocks are buried into the ground. So that frequency, it's a frequency. That's what I'm always trying to go for.
Yeah.
I'm trying to, like, you know, like a radio tower, right? It'll lock into a frequency. You think human beings can't do that in the landscape? Whew.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Maybe we don't have the language and like the common consciousness to really you know, soak that up or whatever. But like, that's what I believe. That's what I would try to do, is like that braid becomes that connection to Mother Earth, right? That braid becomes that cord that's connecting you to, you know.
Like the umbilicus.
Yep. That's very much about what that is. So when you'll see me pull, I often bring it to my stomach and I'll pull and I'll test. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then it'll expand outward. It just becomes like I'm just like a transmitter.
Yeah. So I'm just going to describe the movement you're doing right now, which is this kind of anchoring into at the core in the abdomen, and then this kind of directional extension through the spine and a sense of the crown of the head being really open as well. So there's this, but it's really rooted, and it's rooted to the rock you're talking about. It which is on the other side of the province, and you know, and it becomes a present,
and it becomes that memory we were talking about.
Yeah.
Right, that memory.
Time. Yeah. Yeah.
And that rock is still buried in the ground, and it will stay there. You know.
Yeah. What you're talking about in terms of the resonance of our bodies and of the organisms, and you know, whether they be trees or rock, you know, or rocks or bog and lichen, like the resonance, like you're playing with vibration, and so it's music too, right? So it's not separate. Dance and music are vibrational, both vibrational. Just think about learning from sound artists at the Sound Symposium as a young person in my adolescence, and how I started to understand how vibration was such a broad spectrum from something in the ground to something really, really subtle that we can't even observe except through some other senses that we don't even understand.
I just had a whole like shake, like a shiver through my body. Yes.
Yeah. And then that's like we have this body. We're here with these senses.
Yes.
And these capacities to interact and interrupt too. Vibrations. So you had this process that you worked with Anne Troke.
Yes.
And I'm not sure how long you worked with Anne, but I know that you were exploring authentic movement practice.
Yes.
And I'm curious about how that was for you. What was it like, and what do you take from that?
Sure, that's a lovely question. And I had such an incredible time working with Anne Troke. And honestly, I think, everything that I just kind of said in being able to position myself and understanding what it is that I'm doing here in these spaces was from being in that space with Anne, and Anne not bringing judgment, expectation, actually the opposite, where Anne supported me to open up a space in my body to move and to follow the sequential energy without tapping out.
Right.
That was the practice, to believe. Ultimately, what I really took away from that with Anne was a belief in myself, in my own being, as one that was exploring movement as a form of expression and as a form of storytelling. And to be able to be like I've never watched the performance that I, workshopped back in the fall. I never ever watched it because I felt so raw and open, and there was witnesses in the room, and I thought about it. I was like, you know what? The ego kicks in. It's like, you should watch it and figure that out. And what was that? What did you just do?
Right.
But it was a lesson in that of being like, you open that space of witness. That's it.
Yeah.
I probably will watch it one day, to revisit it. But so Anne and I worked together for a few sessions, and authentic movement was, and I was here with you, Lori, out in the back here in this area of land. So it was set up really nicely so that I could work in a space, in a room, with Anne, and Anne would coach me in this authentic movement and that endurance and that kind of time of when that little bell rings or the sound is on, you're not concerned about anything else. That space is being held for you. Right? So it shifted from that to then driving out here, walking in. I was just clearing the land, sweeping parts of the land, little twigs and moss. I was down on my hands and knees by this little river that ran by. It's all those moments came together. That's just what it was. And at the same time, I think I had been carrying the pressure to, produce something or to perform.
Right.
Because there was an opportunity, and what a beautiful opportunity, right?
Yeah.
But I also recognize that I got to be honest with myself. That's not the space that I wanted to be in, that I felt ready to be in. Right? And that I what an opportunity it is to be able to explore authentic movement in relation to the landscape with some incredible human beings who I've just met and I feel so supported around.
Right.
That doesn't happen every day.
No. And I think, I was, that's when I met you. And it was, and I'd known about your work a little bit before that. So I was super curious to see what would happen. So one of the principles of, I guess improvisation and also somatic experiencing, which is one of the modalities that I practice, is that when there's curiosity, jump on it. Curiosity is medicine. So there's, and especially though, there's something that happens when we become curious about sensation and movement and interoception, so the feelings of the inside of our body. There's something that happens when our curiosity meets that realm that can be super healing. And then for you to be doing that and it being land-based, to me is it's a power combo.
Wow.
So I remember when we were down by the river trying, and we did a little timing thing with Kala, remember?
Yes.
And And then I was watching and noticing, it was just a few minutes, and I was just noticing how there was a movement of your hand and arm that was continuous with the tree that was there nearby. And it wasn't coming from you looking at the tree and
An unintentional
and,
mimic, a
right?
reflection, a mirror.
It was emerging from this practice of authentic movement, this deep listening to interiors.
Oh, deep listening to interiors. That is beautiful.
Yeah.
And it's really cool. It's also, thank you for saying that, because sometimes I don't take the time to step back and actually piece together and maybe necessarily value what it is that I'm bringing to the table in terms of a practice, right? Authentic movement in relation to that. I'm just following.
Yeah.
I'm just following what it is that I feel that I need to do.
Right. Yeah.
Or that I can do. Back to that. What I actually am doing is, it's a prayer. Right? That's my way of connecting, putting down what it is that I need to put down, and opening up to something much larger than myself as a very small and insignificant human being. Right?
Yeah.
Because, like, the trees are speaking too. Right? The water is speaking. The wind is speaking. The wind has a lot to say.
Yeah.
You know?
Around these parts.
Yeah, so I know it might sound, I mean, I don't use this language all the time. I don't bring this part of myself forward all the time, but it's a part of myself that's ever present in terms of understanding how I move and walk through the world. Yeah. And I think I do seek out spaces to create outside of more conventional ways of working. I feel more comfortable in those spaces. You know, being able to work in collaboration, being able to work in, you know, community-based settings where folks are coming together to share and explore ideas, you know, within the fields and the areas of training that everyone's carrying. Like, that's medicine.
You're listening to a conversation between Lori Clark and Megan Massou. This is part of a series of events by Pig, Performative Inquiry Group, and hosted by Neighborhood Danceworks. This conversation happened in April 2022.
Well, I guess, like, speaking specifically to the piece that I, you know, started creating for Festival of New Dance back in the fall of 2021. And that was working with Anne. Anne would open the space for authentic movement, and then through witnessing would name, you know, certain things or images that were coming up, and they were certain things were relating to me, and then I would explain it. So there was this conversation that would be happening back and forth, and then through that was able to, you know, I guess create this structure, a loose structure for containers or baskets, right, for this movement, the space of movement to enter into. So the first one was Threads to the Earth, which was, like, very much about, like, you know, being pretty deep down or low down to the ground, that connection, you know, from the feminine body, you know, into the earth. Then the second phase would be, like, moving upward into the basket. So there was a weave that would happen. My body would take these different shapes of weaving to mimic how I would weave a basket.
Wow.
So it would, you know, the roots to the earth, or threads to the earth, was almost this harvesting of material that then in the second phase would be woven through the space. And that was more of a, like, I was on a bit of a medium plane. Like, I moved upward from the ground and was kind of existing on a medium height plane. And it was more of those organic kind of movements and shapes. And then it shifted to flight, where I would take almost like the ends of the basket, like the weave, and shape that into a basket and come into the arms.
Right.
So that's when, I would move. I moved from like kind of like pelvic and hip to the ground, core shifting and moving across a more medium space, and then moving into the arms to take flight and also ultimately give shape and form to the basket.
Wow.
So that was kind of like what, came out of these generative spaces of exploring authentic movement with Anne, being here in the landscape in your area here. And then, I did the workshopping performance at the Arts and Culture Center back in the fall, and that was the piece, and it was called Basket. And those were the structures that took place. And in that final area with flight, I really tried to embody that expression of Raven and that story. I couldn't even go into a story of Raven, but just tapping into an experience of witnessing Raven or mirroring Raven right through my body.
Invoking Raven.
Invoking Raven, yeah. Transforming that feminine energy through Raven.
As you're talking, I'm just watching the movements you're doing. So so it's super interesting. Some other things are coming to mind for me, like the rootedness of the earth piece, and then there's this pelvic floor sit bones, kind of and I guess the feet and the legs and the sit bones are like our first feet in a way, And then the movement that you were doing of weaving also made me think about spinal movement and the kind of reflexes of movement reaching through the spine. And but I could really see the material, like your hands moving with material in the weaving as well, and the way that weaving and because we could make a movement that's kind of like a wave, but when you're doing it as weaving, you can feel the material that you're passing under and over.
Yes.
In the gesture, it's more than just a wave.
Up, over. Yeah, because when you're weaving, you also have to keep in mind the structure or those that have been woven before, and then those that will be woven after. So there's each one is a little bit different.
Yeah.
It's not a machine doing this weave. It's the body.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah, and then it brings us back to time.
Absolutely, always.
Yeah.
And I So the braid. So this is really cool. Also, as a bit of a realization for me in this moment, because I started doing the braiding, performative artworks. Back in 2017, when I was weaving baskets with synthetic materials, flagging tape, vinyls, plastics. But I decided for the sweetgrass, right, which is a decorative element within our basketry, I wanted to bring that synthetic material onto the land and to braid it, right, with my full body. And so that's how when they poison the bogs, we'll still braid sweetgrass, the interrelation series, and becomes body of water. That whole genre, right, of work now that's been generated, ultimately came from that seed of braiding sweetgrass. And now, when coming in here, 5-6 years later, it's like I'm going into this other area of the basket, and that's the form and the structure itself, the body.
Wow. Yeah. And as you describe it, all of those different elements are really like they're moving in your trunk, in your legs, in your hands, and then that kind of gut solar plexus center, and then that whole
into the arms,
into the raven. And the shoulder blades.
I can feel. Even just right now in that movement, my shoulders are activated in such a way that it's just like I've transformed. My body has just shifted. My experience has just completely shifted.
How do you notice it when you look around Like, does it feel different in this? Because it's a physiology shift, right?
It is a physiology shift. So actually, when I did the authentic movement workshop performance, I had my eyes closed for the majority of the piece.
Right.
Because I become too oversensitized with the visual
Right.
and the other senses of the body. So I remember you and I were having that conversation
Right.
with when you can, you kind of become a little bit overwhelmed, then just shift your vision and like look at, a different area and like allow that to soak in. I also think that that would be a beneficial practice even for me to bring back in. Because I think what's going on is I'm visually overwhelmed
Right.
a lot of the time.
Right. The eyes are working hard.
The eyes are working so hard, and it's also like making the brain have to work really hard to process and transfer information.
Right.
So I think that that's also really exciting when we're talking about the physiology of the body. And for me, since the fall, in like doing that work and doing that piece and like opening up into certain areas that have, held me back, right? The mind and the body connection that has been holding me back, I could identify them. I identified it as hard as it was. And over the winter, I'd been in the gym, like doing a lot of resistance training, building up certain areas in order to sustain and support the body to open up into that movement.
Right.
So it's been a good back and forth where it's like pushing me and pulling me to show up better for myself. That then down the road, I think that piece will come into fruition,
Right.
perhaps.
Well, your awareness of and being able to have those places where there's been injury on your radar, because sometimes when we have injuries, it's too much. So we numb out the awareness of the area, or we kind of keep going in that same keep going,
Keep going, keep going.
stand up straight,
Yep,
get back to it.
yep.
Yeah, and we have a real cultural problem with that, with pushing through all the time.
All the time, and it's just, it erases the essential human gift of humility. Right? To really be in humility.
And the gift of the injury.
Right?
Yeah,
I was
the
thinking
gift
about-
of the loss.
I was thinking about that when I was walking in.
You're listening to a conversation between Laurie Clark and Megan Massou. This is part of a series of events by Pig, Performative Inquiry Group, and hosted by Neighborhood Danceworks. This conversation happened in April 2022. So the thing of turning our heads and looking in different directions, this is a really interesting thing to talk about, because in the context of dance and dance teaching and learning, because it's something that we use in somatic experiencing all the time. But I also noticed that that Christopher House used it when we were doing our dance project with him that Neighborhood Dance Works arranged, and he attributed this particular instruction to one of his teachers, Deborah Hay, who was a important improvising and dancing teacher and leader and part of the Judson Church group in the 70s. But one of the instructions that Deborah would give her dancers, if they were kind of getting stuck or they were getting outside of themselves or whatever, she'd just say, "Turn your fucking head."
Yes. Yes.
When we turn our head, it's literally a change in perspective. The other thing it is that as an organism, if we let our eyes and our head and neck wander, and if there's no predator or there's nothing immediately threatening, then we're sending the message to ourselves and especially our adrenal glands that we do not have to mount any kind of response to threat right now.
Shit.
And sometimes those threats, of course, are in our internal dialogue.
Yeah.
And our eyes and our head and neck can find that that's not happening right now.
Wow. That's really important.
And that, I think it relates to that second guessing thing. Like we go, oh, am I doing it right? Or, oh, should I have done it this way? Or,
Yeah.
is this good enough? Or am I good enough? Or, you know, the fucking nonsense we get on with, which is part of the physiology of adaptation that's not really working so well. But we can interrupt it by coming back to the room. Yeah. Sometimes. So you have an upcoming residency in. Tell me a little bit about that, and about, you mentioned an artist who is
so I'm doing
program.
well, actually, I also want to even just share, I'm currently doing a large group residency that's being facilitated and created by Mohawk French curator and artist and a mentor for me for many years now, France Trepanier. And France has developed this residency called Dreaming the Land. And so there's Indigenous artists from across many territories, not only in what is now known as Canada. And we are meeting on Zoom for like creative circles, but also we're logging dreams. And so myself, as a very active and gifted dreamer, I've been in a space of considering that as an essential creative process and also an essential guiding life force. So the winter has been about that for me as well. And that will come into now a creation project and a lands-based performance during the summer. And all of us in the residency will be doing one of those in our respective territories.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, and so now during the same time, Tanya Willard is also in this residency and has invited me to participate in the Indigenous Arts Intensive Residency at University of British Columbia Okanagan campus during the summer. So what I'm doing, I'm linking the two together because where I don't really have so much of like facilities at home, like larger studio space to create, I'm taking this opportunity to be in residence in the dream world and the creative cycles through Dreaming the Land, taking on the residency at UBCO, and I'm gonna, create a more physical manifestation of the work in residence.
Great.
And I'm excited too because, Tanya and I are both in the residency, so we've both been like in this dream world creative process. So I think to be able to like sit in person and have some of these conversations, I'm just really, really excited. And I have a lot of respect for Tanya's practice and also the invitation that France extended to me to participate. So that's kind of the realm that I'm opening up into, or that I've been in, and that I will continue now into the spring, which will involve traveling and getting out, like getting back
post-COVID or post first couple of years of COVID, getting back into traveling.
And I'm really excited because I'm really focusing on water. Yeah. And being in between both like the world beneath the water and the world like above the water, so like the earth world. That's where I'm at.
Wow. Do you think that when you come back from that residency that you will do some kind of presentation of it at home?
It will, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it will. So for Dreaming the Land, the final aspect of the project is that there will be a performative action or performance or whatever ways artists are positioning that. For me, it'll be a lands-based action, activating whatever object I create in residence. So
I would really like to know when that's happening.
I will definitely keep you in the loop. As I'm even speaking about it here now, like I'm in my mind, I'm like at this area of the river, like I know, right? So even talking about it, my mind, like the images, bring me
The
to
land.
a certain place.
Yeah.
So that's kind of that's my process. Like that's what I follow, and I think it is also really essential to be able to have conversations and like people ask you questions like, so what are you working on? Or like, and genuinely want to hold that space. Those spaces are so important because it fuels the creative process. Conversation is a creative process.
Yeah. This is what Pig has, that's the value of Pig. It's always been a value for those conversations, spaces for that, for both the, it's performative, but it's performative inquiry.
Ooh.
So we're curious about creative process that relates to emerging performance, but also how we perform identity as artists and in the world.
Interesting.
And so that's great. You're naming this specific thing that you value and that we hope to be able to make happen sometimes. Right?
Well, you certainly made it happen today.
Yeah.
You know, and I was last night, I was laying down, I was thinking, what will I say tomorrow?
Right.
I'm like, this is not how you roll, Megan.
Right.
Like you show up
Yeah.
and set the space and feel comfortable in the space and just trust
Yeah.
in that conversation because it is that is an organism in itself.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of the way I like to roll too. When I get too planny, it's
Too planny.
then it's not like it's out of nowhere. The work's been done. The preparation's been happening for years.
Yes.
So it's like, let's trust that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that is a method, or I don't know if you would say a modality, or like a way of working or being trusting in that.
Yeah. Awesome.
So yeah, thank you for inviting me here in such a beautiful, comfortable, safe space to have a genuine conversation. And like I said, I'm walking away from here like feeling both lighter and filled at the same time. And that means a lot to me today. So Walal and Lori.
Well, I just feel the privilege of having this conversation with you, and I feel my heart and kind of feel more here. You know, I've been doing all this Zoom stuff, and it's just so great to be here and sitting on a couch.
Yes, yes.
You know?
Drinking coffee, listening to the wind.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You're listening to a conversation between Lori Clark and Megan Massou. This is part of a series of events by Pig, Performative Inquiry Group, and hosted by Neighborhood Danceworks. This conversation happened in April 2022 with support from Canada Council for the Arts and Arts NL.